what would you say was your first sort of step into becoming an activist?
So 1975, I'm at Heathfield High School, and there were the liberation movements, Mozambique, Angola, and so on. And we had a wonderful teacher, Mr. Govender. And he was our English teacher and our guidance teacher and our classroom teacher. And he was, you know, every lesson that we had, he used to say, you know, that there are things in the country that's wrong, and used to teach us all sorts of things, including atheism and being aware, you know. So for the first time now, from my very indigenous knowledge upbringing, I now became part of another world, which was political. Mr. Govender would teach us about making sacrifices for the struggle, and so we must become aware, you know, that there are things wrong in this country. So that was my first sense that we need to do something. You know, there's something wrong here besides the terrible trauma of apartheid in the everyday. There was also this that things weren't normal. People couldn't be normal. Children couldn't be normal. Things then erupted in 76 later in August. And you know, I just remember we all just run out of the classrooms. It was all so chaotic, and people just say forward and upwards, and mass meetings, and the teachers are no longer in charge, and those used to beat us up. The students used to take the cane and just break it, you know, and throw it into the teacher's faces and stuff, and run to the Steenberg. I was on my way marching to, we had to go to retreat station to occupy the trains, hijack the trains, and then take the train to town. And I remember that day very, very well. And I just got as far as retreat, main road or something, and I just felt somebody grab me and pull me back. I must go home. Yes, so I didn't get there, except that was part of the march. But then I became extremely interested in because I knew something is wrong, right? So we must change it. So we must get rid of the teachers who lock up children. We must get rid of these white people chasing people off the beaches. We must get rid of all these atrocities. I then got a teacher. The teacher was close to Steve Biko, his confidant, and that was 1977, just before he was murdered. Doreen Massen. She was Doreen Philippus at the time, and she was my history teacher. And then things really changed. She got us to read and perhaps even just talk about Biko. And she's you know, you've got to question things. You know, you've got to question things. But they weren't books. They were you know, pamphlets and magazines and stuff. So I learned secret codes there. I learned about theory there. And then he also gave me a book, which was my favorite book later, Let Me Speak, by Domatila da Shungara. And it was this woman with the, I don't know if you know, Let Me Speak, the working class miner woman, Domatila, who worked on the mines in Bolivia. And she is telling the story of being a working class woman and the life on the mines and poverty and exploitation of the mines. And but she was to speak for herself. Nobody must speak for her, not a white person, nobody else. She speaks for herself. And that book had a huge impact on me. That she could speak for herself. And then we also had 10 Days That Shook the World, about the Russian Revolution. And then we had to read Trotsky, we had to read Lenin, we had to read Das Kapital, and you had to know the volumes of Das Kapital. So I had to read early those volumes at that age, because I had to be prepared to be able to engage in the next Sunday. And then we were also taken to films, to watch films, and about the struggles, happening in different parts of the continent and the world, particularly South America. So you had to, and there were discussions on the film. So they would say, now, how do these films relate to apartheid? And why what you're reading in these books, how come you're not learning it at school in your textbooks? Why are these things missing? And then between 1977 and 1979, I was also recruited to do pamphlets. So how to write the pamphlet, and then how to distribute the pamphlet, and how to work with other young people. So my task was to recruit other young people into the reading groups. Something bigger happened when Neville Alexander was unbanned, or just soon after. He decided to come to Grassy Park High to address the students, and he asked if he could address us. And but it must have been after, when this banning order was lifted. And then he asked for four students. He asked Doreen Masson, he asked Doreen, give me 4 students, because he was close to Doreen because of Biko. Give me 4 students to work with, to recruit. And I was one of them, chosen to work with Neville. He would conscientize us, said, come from the island, but I want you to get involved in the civic issues of the community. So you need to start to ask the questions. Why don't we have pavements? Why don't we have sanitation? Why don't you have to question your living conditions? And I think that's where I connected also through these with the activists, like Charlene Houston and others, although they may not have known me, because I was just a very ordinary activist, just working with the youth, and recruit more youth and make more youth aware of civic issues. So that was his way into getting us to question. And then later his book Nusizwe came out, One Azania, One Nation, which became a very important reading for us, along with understanding readings, like Fanon and others. And yeah, so that was, and then 1980 came, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I wanted to be a radiographer. I don't know why. I don't know why. But I wanted to always work in a hospital. But I didn't, that wasn't my path. So, but for that whole year in 1980, I was still making up my mind. And then the headmaster at the school, Mr. van der Heever, heard through Doreen Masson that I'm the student who was quite, I was the top student or something like that. And I have nothing to do. And they've got 6 classes with no teacher. So here I am, only with matric, straight out of school, 17 years old. And Doreen Masson gives Mr. van der Heever this bright idea to hire me. But of course, Doreen had in mind political work and recruitment. So, and so that was a strategy, so that I could just recruit more students to the movement, but under the guise of teaching. So as a 17-year-old, I'm handed then 6 standard 6 classes. All these children. And I'm a child myself. And then all hell broke loose in 1980. boycotts, school boycotts. And it was against unqualified teachers, but almost the entire school was unqualified teachers. I mean, it was just like, I was still one of the higher qualified teachers because I had matric. The others had standard 6 and standard 8, and it was just chaos. So those two were dominant at school. So I then get involved in making the pamphlets and posters for the protests and the boycotts and that. And the school principal called me in, and he said he was very, very disappointed in me because I'm just the girl that he's hired, and now I'm turning the school upside down, and he made a mistake, and I mustn't listen to the adults.
Professor June, can I just ask you, the 1980s boycotts against unqualified teachers, was that something that the children started, or was it the parents, or how did that come about?
Yes, very good. Those were the children. The children. So by 1917, remember 76, the whole SRC movement after that became quite strong. So there were two very influential people in getting the student representative councils going and getting the students to question their education and who teaches them. So there was Lorna, Gabriel, and Peter Gabriel, and they were local ANC activists, and they were instrumental in starting the SRC movement. So what they used to do was to work with the youth at all the schools. So at Grassy Park High, they worked, for example, with Gert Bam, who later married in life, and to start the SRC movements. And that was powerful. So they focused on really getting the students to form structures, organized structures at school. And so the questioning, therefore, of qualifications came from that movement.
Would you say that, you know, the incident where you stood up to the gangsters in your classroom? I wanted to ask you earlier on while we were talking about that. Would you say that was your first act of resistance?
Wow, wonderful that you actually see it that way. You're the first person, Elise, to put your finger on it. Yes, I think so. And I think it said a lot of who I am and who I became. And then yes, that is right. That must have been the first resistance, like active resistance. I would say that because they were all men. They were all men, youth, and they, you know, smoked buttons and mandrakes and cannabis mixed. And I just felt they're not going to take over my school. And they're not going to deprive me of being at my school. It's my school.